Welcome to People in Perspective. I'm Adam Nye, and my guest for this edition is interior designer Tony Nie. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
Now, before we leap into interior design, from the start, one dark and stormy night, you were born in an elevator, is that correct?
That is correct. It was one of the worst snowstorms in early January that I had seen in a long time, and my father had to dig out with the manure loader to get to the corner a half a mile from the house, meet the county snowplow, who took them the rest of the way to Old St. Francis Hospital, where car roofs were being collapsed by the weight of the snow, and there was a power outage, and I was born in the elevator because the power went out. Fortunately, the doctor was in the same elevator as my mother.
All right. Now, you came from all that hullabaloo, all that in rural Iowa where you grew up, and now you're in Chicago, you're in the suburbs, and you're doing interior design. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that journey. Currently, you worked at Marshall Fields for 32 years.
That's correct.
And the balance has been filled in working at SFDG, Susan Fredman Design Group, downtown. And while you were at Marshall Fields, you did quite a bit. You had quite a few projects. What would you say is your process for designing a space?
The best thing that any interior designer can really do is be a good listener. Many people don't really know necessarily what they want, but many people can tell you what they don't want, and you can weed out, in many cases, those things and then focus on what's left, and they discover, oh, that's good. Or they may think they want to go in a direction, but you find that they haven't been exposed to enough things, so once you finished listening to them, you realize that other suggestions might be far more helpful, and you take them in new directions, and it's a partnership of discovery together.
Okay, and when you were at Marshall Fields, I understand you also did a couple of their trend houses. It's just a thing they did. They set up an area, and you were given a budget, and you created a space showing what they had and what you could do with it in the design department. And here we have some visuals of the trend houses. Now, this one would be which? What are we seeing here?
This would have been the first trend house that I ever saw as an Iowa farm boy coming into Chicago when I first started college, and the trend house of 1975. So I know the designer who did it very well, Olga Kiewicz. She was a fabulous designer, filled with English Regency chairs, beautiful hand-carved Minton Spadell bed, but really, really top-notch. The trend house originally was designed to show, it was first started in the Depression, and its purpose was to show people how they could design on a budget. Well, being Marshall Fields, it later, after the challenges of the Depression were over with, they instead used it to show the very best of furniture, art, design, very wonderful and top-notch pieces. And I took part in 3 trend houses as the primary designer during my career, and also assisted on a couple other ones. So I was very, very fortunate because the budget was generous. You really did look for the most wonderful items in design.
Fascinating. So it was all started during the Depression. And it's that sort of tradition that is really interesting in what you've done. It's taking things that started off in rural Iowa, they started off in the Depression, and bringing them to someplace completely new and where people want them to be. You have another picture here of one of the trend houses that you actually worked on.
And this was the first trend house that I did in 1990. And that was also the last year that they did sketches of the trend houses instead of doing it just with photography.
I see. And this would be the fireplace?
Right. It may not show up wonderfully on camera, but it was actually a carved lion's head where the mouth was actually the fireplace.
Wow. That is really interesting. It does show some of the interesting stuff they had, definitely. You also have this. It's a common game, but here we have
Marshall Fields. It was the Marshall Fields monopoly. So my second trend house was actually taking the place of one of the higher end properties in the game. It showed such things as Marshall Fields, Walnut Room, and some of the other, the Tiffany Dome. But one of the expensive properties happened to have been a picture of one of my trend houses, the living room to be exact.
And you've done the trend houses. You've worked with houses, and some of those houses you've won competitions for ASID. You've been featured in House and Home magazine. But you've also done planes, boats. Now, is it a different experience designing a boat with the curvature and the shaping?
It is. The first boats I did were sailing boats, and so those were much smaller, even though they were quite large boats. So virtually everything is built in, and you're just really adding fabrics to the built-ins. But when you are doing boats in the 200 feet plus range, then you're really doing them pretty much like homes. In other words, it has regular sofas, it has regular dining tables, it has lamps, it has everything you would have in a regular home, because at that scale, they're probably as large as quite a generous suburban home with many, many bedrooms and many, many bathrooms.
Obviously, you did it well. One of them was featured in Showboats International. So, for your own home, you've brought in, we've got some of the pillows, and this fabric that was brought in has a bit of a story.
Well, this ties back together again with the trend house. This was actually in one of the trend houses, and it was the last of the hand block printed fabrics that a very famous company, Lee Joffa, did. And it was an extremely high seller in 1970 when it was done in the trend house. And I was also fortunate, because of my timing, to have met Sally Dalbert, who was the designer at the time. So my timing was great as a transition between the old designers who remembered the times when you would have to go to lunch with your gloves on and your hat on, and the new, more relaxed designers that you're more likely to run into today.
And it's that building history into the projects. You've got fabrics that have a story, and in your home, you've got even some tie-ins with the farm you grew up on. We've got a picture of that. This was the humble beginning of the man you see before you. This was the family farm where you grew up. So in your home, you've incorporated this feel. You've got horses, sheep, pigs. It's interesting how you bring in the stories of people. You bring in them to your spaces. You're helping them to give you that feeling. So you've built that in. It's really quite incredible how you've done that. Well, thanks for coming on the show today. I'm Adam Nye. See you next time on People in Perspective.